Hey guys, how's it going? It's Al. Week 14, the final week of your regular season in your fantasy football leagues, and I am going to talk to you about my top 24 wide receiver rankings on the week. The wide receiver ones and wide receiver twos for this particular week. We got a whole bunch of buys this week. The Falcons, the Packers, the Colts, the Saints, the Commanders, and the Bears. So not a whole lot of guys, maybe 3 or 4 that might be at the back end of our wide receiver list. So it's kind of a pure list this week. This is going to be the last week that I do these rankings videos. As you go into the playoffs, we'll convert them into shorts. We'll do a top 5 list for the playoff week. So I hope that you had a good season in fantasy football. Hopefully we helped just a little bit over here at the Al Smizzle Fantasy Football channel, and you can run all the way through your playoffs and take down the gold against your idiot friends. So drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the notifications bell, and let's go.
He's a legend.
The Week 14 Smiz Gang Listener League is posted. It's $10 as always. It is absolutely no rake and the best tournament on DraftKings as always. Also, it's not available in the lobby. You have to go to smizzle.tv/links to find the link to the league. That is where you have to go to get it. And there are links to absolutely everything else that I do. The main channel, the Discord, the Listener League, everything else, all my socials. So go to that link tree and find it at smizzle.tv/links and make sure that you get in the Listener League today. We've got to fill it. Otherwise, they're going to make it smaller next week. The wide receiver one on the week for me is Justin Jefferson. Obviously, one of my favorite players in the league. Now, 2 of the last 3 weeks, all 3 weeks, he's had tough matchups. The New York Jets, who have 2 amazing cornerbacks. New England, who plays very slow, but he had a very good game against them, 32.34 fantasy points in PPR. And Dallas, who Minnesota got absolutely throttled by. Now they get to go to Coors Field. They go to play at Ford Field against the Detroit Lions. Justin Jefferson is going to go back to absolutely eating double-digit targets in 4 of the last 5. That's where he needs to sit. He has been hampered a little bit by the fact that Kirk Cousins has not had any very explosive games this year. I believe that he's helped by the addition of TJ Hawkinson, somebody else that can help sustain drives. The longer the drives they have, the higher amount of offensive opportunities they have for him to flex the massive target market share that he has. So Justin Jefferson, 7 touchdowns on the year, 23.7 fantasy points per game. He's your number 1. At number 2, Davante Adams, 24.1 fantasy points per game. And that comes on the backs of the last 5 weeks, really, where 4 of those 5 weeks, Davante Adams has had a 30-point or more output. Now, that correlates directly with the fact that Darren Waller went on IR and Hunter Renfrow went on IR. The only bad game that he had, he had 14.4 points against Seattle in week 12. Every one of those weeks, double-digit targets, no less than 7 catches in any of those weeks. And over that time span, 7 touchdowns across 5 weeks. He is going to stay hot here against the Los Angeles Rams. Matchups don't matter. Some guys, matchups do matter, wide receiver, cornerback matchups, but like there are certain wide receivers that are just unmatchupable with. And Davante Adams is exactly that guy. Tyreek Hill comes in at number 3, squaring off against Los Angeles Chargers. Going to be a bounce week for him. Or for that offense. He doesn't need a bounce. We had 32.6 points against San Francisco, one of the toughest defenses in the league. 3 of the last 5 games, he's been above 30 fantasy points, averaging 23.7 on the year. The Chargers haven't stopped anything. They struggle against the run. They've had tons of injuries, and Tyreek Hill is going to eat no matter who you play him against. Now, the one problem has been that Tyreek Hill has not scored a lot of touchdowns on the year, only 5 of them, but 3 of those 5 have come in the last 4 weeks. So touchdown upside on top of all the target market share that he's been getting, how great he's been this year. Tua's number 1 target week in, week out. Now, this one is a little bit off the reservation for some people, but I have Amon-Ra St. Brown as my number 4. I think that we're going to see a very similar run-in to week 18 the way that we saw last year from Amon-Ra St. Brown. There's just nowhere else to throw the ball. The defense can't stop anybody. They're always in track meets pretty much every single week. And he does a really good job at getting separation in short and intermediate. He has downfield ability. He has a quarterback in Jared Goff who can just deliver the ball and trust him. The last 2 weeks, over 30 fantasy points. I can't see them giving him less than double-digit targets in any game. And if they do, it's going to be like 9. I can't see him having less than 7 catches in any game moving forward. And in full PPR, which is what I rank for, that's what you want, is volume over basically everything else. 3 touchdowns the last 2 weeks on top of it. massive red zone target share, end zone targets overall. Like, he could see something close to 35 to 40% of the Lions market share of targets the rest of the way. 100 yards plus from scrimmage in play. 3 of the last 4 weeks he's gotten to that. Just going to be an absolute monster on the run in, and he squares off against Minnesota, who has not stopped like anything all year long. So this game has the highest total on the week at like 53.5. Absolute track meet. Love to see it. Stephon Diggs comes in behind Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now look, that's not to say that I think that Amon-Ra St. Brown is a more talented wide receiver than Steph Diggs. Doesn't mean to say that I think that he's on a better offense than Steph Diggs, but he does have a better matchup and does have an easier path to volume. Steph Diggs, much like Devontae Adams, somebody who is not taken away. His efficiency goes down a little bit, averaging 24.1 fantasy points per game on the year. The last time they played the Jets, got 14.3 in a down day for Josh Allen. He's fine. You're not sitting him. He is an amazing wide receiver, 10 touchdowns, averaging 100.2 yards per game. He is going to get his, and he is going to eat once again. At number 6, Jamar Chase. I love that he's back. Jamar Chase is just so much fun to watch. He had 7 catches on 8 targets last week. The one that he did not catch was probably his best catch of the day, going out of bounds, reaching up over his head, leaping backwards, and making a one-handed catch, but out of bounds. Showed no signs of the hip injury that sidelined him for a while. Hopefully he is A-okay to go for the rest of the season. I don't want to see any sort of relapses here. Jamar Chase is an absolute monster. A.J. Brown got a GM fired. I mean, you play Tennessee, and they're sitting there in the owner's box watching the guy that they traded away go for 119, 2 touchdowns on 10 targets with 8 catches. They had their GM signed until like 2027. They're like, nah, we're going to pay you for 4 more years to not do your job anymore. We can't take it. We can't sit here and watch A.J. Brown dominate and turn Philadelphia, help turn Jalen Hurts from a guy that a lot of people thought was not going to be the future of Philadelphia at the quarterback into an MVP candidate where they've only lost 1 game on the year. No, we're going to pay you to not do your job anymore. A.J. Brown definitely got a GM fired this week. CeeDee Lamb has had a tremendous year. Love to see what he's done. I want to see the maturation and progression of a player as things move along. He's seen 18 targets the last 2 weeks, has averaged 20.5 fantasy points those 2 weeks. And those 2 weeks were games that they played from ridiculously ahead. The week before that against Minnesota, they won 40-3. He only got 5 targets in that game. The week before, in a game they lost against Green Bay, 41. So the last 3 somewhat competitive games, and that game against Indianapolis was competitive for at least 3 quarters till Indy turned it over like 47 times. CeeDee Lamb is getting better as we approach the playoffs, and he is obviously much better with Dak Prescott under center because they just run a different offense with when Cooper Rush started those 5 games versus when Dak Prescott's in there. They're faster paced. He delivers the ball better. He's just a better quarterback. So that 17.4 fantasy points per game is in games where Cooper Rush started as well as Dak. He averages more fantasy points per game in the ones that Dak starts. DeAndre Hopkins coming in at number 9 for me this week. Now, there is some rumblings and some concerns on a 1-game sample size that DeAndre Hopkins is not going to get the amount of targets that he had been getting since returning from suspension because Hollywood Brown got a higher target market share of targets the game before. 18.7 fantasy points, 18.1, 19.8, 13.6, averaging 21.7 on the season. That's the last 4 games. I'm not concerned. They square off against New England, who don't let you run the ball a lot. They've been giving 25 plus opportunities to James Conner since the Benjamin debacle release, whatever you want to call it. I think Hopkins goes back to 9+ targets in this game. Obviously, having Hollywood on the other side, you have an alpha and then a mini alpha on opposite of DeAndre Hopkins, but he is the mini alpha, and he's the big guy. 95.7 yards per game on average since he returned. So, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And hopefully for your fantasy teams, they're trying. T. Higgins comes in at number 10 for me this week. 2 of the Cincinnati Bengals here in my top 10 playing against Cleveland, Cincinnati in Cincinnati. T. Higgins has been very good without Jamar Chase in the lineup, and he's been very good in games with Jamar Chase in the lineup. Now, yes, he's going to take a hit in terms of his target market share, but you look at the first 4 weeks of the season, weeks 2, 3, and 4, 19.1 fantasy points, 14.3, 28.4. It's not like he can't have big games when Jamar Chase is in there, because now you've got T. Higgins running against single coverage with no safety over the top. You have to pay so much attention to Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins profiles as somewhat of an alpha himself in the games where he was the main guy and Jamar Chase was out facing teams' number one coverage against Tennessee and Pittsburgh. 27.4 fantasy points, 26.8 fantasy points. So yes, a little bit lower floor for T. Higgins, averaging 15.4 fantasy points per game this year, but just as high a ceiling when Jamar Chase is there versus when he's out. DK Metcalf has been transformed from a downfield boom or bust sort of threat to a really high floor, short to intermediate route, box out for touchdowns sort of receiver with Geno Smith, averaging 15.1 fantasy points per game. I happily have him here against Carolina in my number 11 spot. I'm willing to admit that I was wrong. He was on my do not draft list early in the season. I still think that it was too much to pay versus everybody else in that range. However, he has done a good job of transforming himself, because I was concerned with the offense they were going to run around Geno Smith. I was not wrong about DK Metcalf. I was wrong about how good Geno Smith could be in that Seahawks offense. And Geno Smith has done a fantastic job this year, averaging 20 fantasy points per game. And DK Metcalf has had to change his game to suit Geno Smith's game and has done a fantastic job as a now professional wide receiver who can hurt you in so many different ways depending on the talent and the skill set of his quarterback. So kudos to DK Metcalf for somewhat proving me wrong. Jalen Waddle is my number 12. Now, we have to monitor whether he is going to be okay this week. He left the last game with an injury. He had a leg injury against the league's best defense in San Francisco. I think he's fine. I think he's going to play. They square off against the Chargers. Big plays back in the possibility here, and it's basically Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. So another team with two monster wide receivers in our top 12 this week. We had been waiting for the targets to escalate for Keenan Allen, and they definitely escalated in week 13 against Las Vegas. Keenan Allen logging 14 targets that week. He had taken two games where they kind of eased him back in. The first game, he didn't play a full complement of snaps. The second game, he did play against Arizona, full complement of snaps. This week against Las Vegas, or last week against Las Vegas, 14 targets. Only caught 6 of them. Did happen to catch a ridiculous touchdown on a tremendous throw by Justin Herbert. 88 yards, still has yet to get you 100 yards from scrimmage, but 28.8, 15.9, 13.4 in the last 3 games since returning from injury. And based on the 5 games that he's played this year, one of them he left early, he is averaging 12.8 on the year. So we're seeing more of what his true numbers should be, somewhere around 16 fantasy points per game the last few weeks. Matchup against Miami, they project to be playing from behind in this one. Should be a lot of throwing. Should be a very entertaining game on Sunday night. Keenan Allen is number 13 for me. At number 14, Chris Godwin. He has kind of overtaken Mike Evans as a consistent target monster in this offense. The last 3 weeks, Mike Evans has 19 targets, and Chris Godwin basically 26 targets over the last 2, 8 the week before that. Double-digit targets in every game but 3 this year, averaging 14.8 fantasy points per game. And at 15, the very possible rookie of the year, depending on the next 5 weeks. There's a lot to play for. Yes, voters can be turned and shaken by what have you done for me lately. And Garrett Wilson for the New York Jets. Chris Olave had the better start to the season, but Garrett Wilson has really come on since he got out from underneath the albatross that was the other half of the law firm in Wilson and Wilson. So he has kicked Zach to the curb, and now we have Mike White. And the 2 games under Mike White, 27.2 fantasy points, 26.4 fantasy points on 23 targets in 2 weeks. Volume over everything. Wilson is averaging 14.1 fantasy points per game this season, but was going to be really tough to gauge because of how up and down the roller coaster that Zach Wilson was at quarterback. Much more accurate throws, much more throws on target, and he is looking like he is a tremendous wide receiver for years to come. As long as that volume sustains, Garrett Wilson could walk away with the rookie of the year. Christian Kirk is right behind him. He was signed to a monster contract last offseason, and a lot of hemming and hawing was done about what they had to get somebody in there. They still need to get another alpha because they have Christian Kirk, who's good. He's not great, but he's good. And then they got a bunch of, just a guy, just another guy behind him. 8 targets, 9 targets, 12 targets, averaging 16.3 on the year and running most of his snaps from the slot. So easily convertible targets into catches for Christian Kirk. And now he squares off against Tennessee, one of the best pass funnels in the league. They're very tough against the run, very big defensive line. They force you to throw it, and they have terrible cornerbacks and safeties, which basically means that your efficiency is going to take a massive uptick. For a quarterback who's shown really good efficiency, even though it's kind of a dink and dunk offense in Jacksonville, we don't mind that, because in full PPR, just give me all the catches, please. Christian Kirk does a very good job of getting open and shows short and intermediate ranges. Very, I don't know, bankable targets for him on a week in, week out basis. Amari Cooper is on the road, and I still have Amari Cooper at number 17. 8 fantasy points last week on the road against Houston. A lot of that was because of the inefficiency of his quarterback, who made his first start in 700 plus days. We're going to see 8+ targets here for Amari Cooper against Cincinnati in a game that they project to play from behind as 6 or 7 point underdogs, depending on which sports book you check. And he's just too talented. He's too good. If the balls can be delivered on target from Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper should be more than fine in a game that they project to have to throw it 35 to 40 times. So monster game of targets, possibly incoming. 9 to 13 targets likely incoming from Amari Cooper. We'll see if he can put up points when he's playing at home. The guy just doesn't like hotel beds. What can I tell you? He doesn't like playing on the road. I don't know why. It has nothing to do with turf or dome or out of dome or on grass or whatever. He hates hotels. That's it. It's clear. He hates hotels, and we're moving on. Devonta Smith, I apologize for pronouncing it, had the monster game that we wanted him to have last week. Caught 5 balls, 8 targets, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Very good talent. I love the skill set on Devonta Smith. Great red zone target, has the ability to get deep, great separation, fantastic route runner, runs opposite a true alpha, and he profiles down the road as an alpha himself as he ages and puts on a little bit more body mass and weight as things move along. He may never put on a ton, but like neither did Marvin Harrison back in the day. I'm not saying he's Marvin Harrison, but like he's a really, really good wide receiver. And in the absence of Dallas Goedert, has seen over 30% of the target market share on Philadelphia. That is enough to be really solid. 14 point the last 4 weeks, 24.2, 9, 13.8, 14.9, now squares off against the New York Giants, averaging 13.4 fantasy points per game on the season. I think he averages more like 14, 15 moving forward as long as Dallas Goedert's out. Dallas Goedert will be returning in a couple of weeks. Tyler Lockett, same kind of a situation as DK Metcalf. 12 targets last week, 7 the week before, averaging 16.6 fantasy points per game. You're never thrilled to play Tyler Lockett because it's like, well, I don't think he has very much touchdown upside. And then every week he scored a touchdown the last 5 weeks because we think that DK Metcalf's going to be the guy. It's the Marlowe line from The Wire. We think that it's one way, but it's the other way. Tyler Lockett's been the more consistent touchdown scorer, at least over the last month and a half, but his target market share is not that tremendous for me to be able to rank him higher. He's very touchdown dependent. Yes, he had 12 targets against the Rams, but 7, 5, and 5 the previous 3 games, which holds down his ranking because volume over everything. And you don't want to have to bank on a touchdown, but it's a good passing offense that funnels through basically just 2 guys. At number 20, DJ Moore squaring off against Seattle. Seattle's not been a very efficient defense. DJ Moore is a tremendous talent, scored a touchdown in week 12, 23 fantasy points in that game. We have Sam Darnold back. I'm expecting him to get like 7, 8 targets on average the rest of the season as things move along. Baker Mayfield was not the answer. DJ Moore will never play with good quarterbacks. That's just the way that it goes, but at least Sam Darnold has eyes for DJ Moore. 11.7 fantasy points per game. Juju Smith-Schuster keeps getting his bell rung, and I hate it because I can't rank him higher. Like he had concussion issues, 4 targets, 3 targets, 4 targets the last 3 games. The Chiefs really spread the ball around. It's like Travis Kelce and then a big gap. Like if you tiered the wide receivers in Kansas City, it's like Travis Kelce and then an empty tier 2 and then Juju Smith-Schuster tier 3 and then all the other guys at tier 4. That's kind of the 4 tiers of wide receiver. Just lump all of the rest of them into tier 4, Juju Smith-Schuster at tier 3. And the reason I have him at tier 3 now is because the last 3 games that he's played, 4, 3, and 4 targets, after essentially being an 8 target a game guy the rest of the season. The matchup isn't great either, playing against Denver, and they project to play from ahead. Isaiah Pacheco has done a really good job of running the football. They have multiple running backs that can do the work for them in this game. It would not shock me if Patrick Mahomes had over 300 yards passing this week, or if he had less than 300 yards passing. Like if he Neither one would shock. He could have 350 yards or he could have like 220 if they get ahead and Denver can't move the ball and they just play very close to the vest, or they get up like 14 at halftime and they just don't have to do much in the second half because Denver can't score touchdowns. They've only allowed 1 touchdown a game on average the last 7 weeks. Denver's defense is extremely legit. For that, I had to dock Juju Smith-Schuster. Same thing goes for Mike Evans. Getting docked for 2 reasons. One, Godwin is the guy who's getting all the targets. 19 targets over the last 3 weeks. That's like 6 a game. 6 point whatever. 6 and a sixth. It's not what it was early in the season when he was basically logging 10 targets a game plus for 3 weeks right before this run. But Godwin has taken over as the #1 wide receiver. And they have a tough matchup against San Francisco, one of the toughest defenses in the league. Now, you're going to look at DVP and say, well, on DraftKings, they have him as a green and like they give up a lot of yards. Yeah, because they play from ahead so much, San Francisco, the teams are forced into like 70% pass rates. And Tampa Bay does want to throw the ball a lot, but like the efficiency is going to be way, way down in this spot. So give me targets over everything. And if we only think that he's going to get like 6 targets, he has to score a touchdown. I don't like having to have guys that must score touchdowns to pay off their rank. Marquise Hollywood Brown going up against New England saw 8 targets in his return. Now this was the trick, right? This is why I never listened to coach speak. They had basically said, we're not going to play Marquise Brown a full. He's going to be on a pitch count. We're going to keep him on a snap count. We're going to ease him back in. Yeah, they eased him back in with like 95% of snaps, ran routes on basically every drop back for Kyler Murray, and he led the team in terms of targets and target market share that game. 8 targets, 6 catches. He's going to be the secondary guy. Hopefully he can get behind the defense here and catch a long one for you. I'm expecting like 6 or 7 targets opposite DeAndre Hopkins, as you can tell by my rankings, but a very good talent. I still haven't seen this Arizona offense fully stocked. We don't have Rondale Moore back yet. They lost Ertz for the year. This was going to be a really fun offense. Unfortunately, they've played whack-a-mole with all their pass catchers all year long. And rounding everything out, Josh Palmer. As long as Mike Williams is out, Josh Palmer has basically been a very solid wide receiver 2 for the Chargers. He can't really operate consistently as their wide receiver 1, but as long as Keenan Allen is back, 11 targets, 7 targets, 10 targets, 13 fantasy points, 10.6. Then the game where he broke out against Kansas City with 2 touchdowns, where he was kind of the wide receiver 3, which is where I think he can eat the most. For at least half of that game, Mike Williams was back, and he gets to run against Nickelback, and that's where he can win, right? That's where Palmer can win the most. So he becomes kind of a short and intermediate guy whenever he's the wide receiver 2, as opposed to being the guy that runs deep, and then whenever Herbert sees an opportunity, he hits him with a deep throw. The targets are going to be assured in what should be a very high volume passing game. This game has the 2nd highest total on the slate at 52 for the week 14 games. 53.5 is the Vikings and Lions. So this should be fireworks on Sunday night. It was flexed to that game, and Joshua Palmer should be in a position to pay off for his fantasy managers. So thank you guys for watching these rankings videos all season long. It's my first season doing them for you. Drop a like on the video. Good luck to you in your fantasy playoffs, and find another video right there.
He's a legend.